I know we've got a couple of minutes before the beginning of the hour, but I want to start us by getting in the right heart space. So I'm going to play a song, a music video. My wife Connie did the videography, but it's by Peter Mayer, and he's a singer-songwriter in this movement that we just love. And this song is called "Everything is Holy Now." And once you get the tune, which you will probably pretty quickly, feel free to sing along. You'll hear me singing.
When I was a boy, each week on Sunday we would go to church and pay attention to the priest. He would read the holy word and consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. Everything is holy now. And when I was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two, and Jesus made the water wine. And I remember feeling sad. Miracles don't happen still. Now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick is that anything is here at all. So the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding where there isn't one. When holy water was rare at best, it barely wet my fingertips. Now I have to hold my breath like I'm swimming in a sea of it. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down, but I walk it with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now. Child's face, say it's not a testament, that'd be very hard to say. See another new morning come, and say it's not a sacrament, and tell you that it can't be done. This morning outside I stood, I saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush and singing like a scripture verse. It made me want to bow my head. I remember when church let out, how things have changed since then. Everything is holy now. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down, but I walk it with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now.
welcome you all from the Western Montana Spiritual Development Council. Every time we do this, I think, oh, we're done. Nobody else will ever show up in Missoula, and we'll just all quit and go home. But that hasn't happened. We were born in this sanctuary in 2005. If some of you remember, Marcus Ford was going to be here, and we sold some tickets, and 470 people showed up. And he did a roll call, and we had the Buddhists and the Quakers and the spiritual but not religious, and the Church Alumni Association, and the Catholics, and so whatever faith tradition you've left or are still part of, you're most welcome back to this place. We are a group of lay and clergy members, but mostly lay, and we sponsor talks, workshops, retreats. We stretch from Hamilton to Polson and Thompson Falls. That's where the Western Montana Spiritual Development Council, and it's vague enough that we can do anything you think is within that charter, so please talk to us. For those of you who might have just seen the title and don't quite know why you're here, let me tell you that Michael Dowd came here in 2008 when his book first came out, Thank God for Evolution, How the Marriage of Science and Religion Will Transform Your Life and Your World. We're just delighted that he wrote us this spring and said, hey, we're coming through again, would you like to have us? And we said, absolutely. Since that time, he's been in the New York Times and the Washington Post and Newsweek and on all the major TV channels. He blogs on Huffington Post. He has given a TEDx talk, which is going to be similar to this one, so you can watch it again on YouTube. And he has given a lecture at Caltech. He speaks from both science and the heart, that it matters what we think about evolution. He wants each of us to know that a sacred evolutionary worldview can transform our lives and relationships personally and permanently. That the universe can be trusted and to move in the direction of more diversity, more awareness, more transformation, and more intimacy. And collectively, he wants humanity to realize that if we don't, as a species, become conscious of the process of evolution and adjust our institutions and practices accordingly, we may not be part of the body of life on this planet much longer. So, on both a personal and a collective level, it's very much worth hearing. Michael will talk first on life, death, and the sacred side of science, and we'll take questions afterward, and I will have a mic. Right after his question and answer period, Connie Barlow, his wife, who is a distinguished science writer and is now working on new materials for children and youth that unite science and a meaningful and certainly sacred worldview, will hold a short program in the chapel, so where it says Wesley Chapel. If you want to be part of that for about 20 minutes and this talk has excited you and you'd like to know, well, you know, how would I show it to my kids or my grandkids or my youth group? You go through that door, you can have 20 minutes of kind of experiencing with others what it would be like to share this as a story, as a parable. Most of us have grown up with parables. We know how to teach them. We know how to live by them. And this is a new way of using science information in a parable. So we encourage any of you who can stay to do that. But you can also look at the books and DVDs in the back. And we thank you again for coming. It's been a wonderful night and a wonderful group.
I'm curious, how many of you have never heard me speak or my wife, Connie Barlow, speak before? Great. All right. That's what I'm talking about. So I've actually got two titles. The other title of my program is Religious Naturalism, an Inspiring Vision of Humanity's Future. I'd like to start with two quotes from two of the heavyweight thinkers of the last 50 years. Gregory Bateson writes, "The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between the way nature works and the way people think." And then Edward O. Wilson at Harvard says, "We exist in a bizarre combination of Stone Age emotions, medieval beliefs, and godlike technology." Now, don't those quotes go great together? In my opinion, the most important face of reality to be in right relationship to is the future. And so I dedicate this program to my only granddaughter, my year-and-a-half-old granddaughter, Isla Renee. Don't you just love that picture? Loyal Rue is probably the world's, certainly I consider them the most helpful or accurate philosopher of religion. And he's got a book called Religion is Not About God. And what he means is that religion is about our relationship to reality, which is usually personified as God or the goddess or the various gods, but it's about right relationship to reality. And he's got this wonderful quote. He says, the most profound insight in the history of humanity is that we should seek to live in accord with reality. Indeed, living in harmony with reality may be accepted as a formal definition of wisdom. If we live at odds with reality, foolishly, then we will be doomed. But if we live in right relationship with reality, wisely, then we will be saved. He goes on to say that the challenge is that we have so many different stories about what reality is like and what reality says and does and how to live in right relationship to reality. But that actually makes complete sense when you realize that these two fundamental questions would have been answered differently at different times in human history and different places around the world. I mean, what's real and what's important, which are the two fundamental questions that every culture needs to ask, would have been answered differently, say, 200,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, or 20 years ago, or in a desert, or a jungle, or New York City. It's kind of like the 5 blind men and the elephant. You know, if they're experiencing a different aspect of reality, if these were 5 different theologians, you'd have 5 radically different theologies. Reality at this scale, what's real and what's important at the scale of families and clans, say 100,000 years ago, is not the same as when we start complexifying and building tribes. And then you get a bunch of tribes interacting. They face some crisis, some challenge, some chaos. They figure out how to align the self-interest of each tribe with a new level of complexity, and a chiefdom or a kingdom emerges. And then you got a bunch of chiefdoms and kingdoms interacting. See, this is how the world has become as complex as it is. The various wisdom traditions reflect regional collective intelligence at that scale of complexity. But now we're in a global situation where we need global answers to these questions. Regional answers will not suffice to serve humanity. And that's what science is. Science is our species' global collective intelligence. You don't understand science if you think it's just another language game. It reflects, in fact, the skeptical scientific tradition where scientists are always trying to prove each other wrong is actually a good thing for helping us to get collective intelligence at the global scale. Now, there's a distinction between factual truth and practical truth that's a vital one. David Sloan Wilson is one of the world's leading evolutionary theorists, and he talks about practical realism or factual realism. See, no religion in the world is factually true. We didn't even have the distinction of fact until about 500 years ago. But any religion that has existed for any length of time is almost by definition practically true. That is, if you act as if it's true, you'll experience personal wholeness and social coherence. That's what all religions do. So, if science reflects humanity's global collective intelligence, what is religion? Is religion merely supernatural otherworldlyism? Is that all religion is? Well, no, I suggest to you it's not. By the way, this is me at the bottom of Deer Creek Falls in the Grand Canyon. This actually goes up 150 feet. But religions are mythic maps of what's real and what's important, or how things are and which things matter. That if you align your life and your society with that map, that GPS of what's real and what's important, you'll experience personal wholeness and social coherence. And you'll provide access. Religions have provided access to the feeling states that humans have always needed to thrive. See, religions helped humans cooperate at a larger scale than we would have simply on biological instincts. You don't find any other animal other than like the eusocial insects that are very genetically related cooperating at the scale that humans cooperate on. And these fundamental feeling states, I call them the feeling states necessary for humans to thrive. We don't thrive if all we can do is look to the future with fear. We do thrive when we can look to the future with trust. Doesn't matter what your religion or philosophy. We don't thrive if all we can do is look to the past with guilt or resentment. We do thrive when we can look to the past with gratitude. In fact, that's part of what therapy is about, is helping people re-story their past. And then we don't thrive if we're overwhelmed by the challenges of the day. I mean, as we all know, compost happens. Life just throws us a bunch of gunk to deal with sometimes. So how do we stay inspired to be in action, whatever the challenges may be? And these fundamental feeling states are what all humans have needed to thrive. But until recently, all we had were beliefs that could get us here. We didn't have the knowledge. And every tradition had a set of beliefs that got you here. But we now have knowledge that can get us there, but fortunately, not at the expense of religion, but in a way that helps the religious traditions themselves to evolve. I am suggesting that we are in the early stages of what will eventually be called the evidential reformation. That is where our best map of what's real and what's important doesn't come from the church hierarchy, as was thought in much of the Christian West. And then in the Protestant Reformation, the reformers said, no, 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 solo scriptura, only the Bible. So the Bible was seen as the primary place to go to for what's real and what's important. Well, what we're now seeing is that evidence, scientific evidence, historic evidence, and cross-cultural evidence provides our best map of what's real and what's important. And so what I'm going to suggest is that when we have our best scientific understanding of these three things, and that's what tonight's program is going to be about, we're going to take a look at big history, human nature, and death and chaos from an evidential standpoint, from our best global collective intelligence, what there's just hardly any disagreement about. We can have a deeply inspiring vision of the future. So this is the bold claim I'm making. You'll decide whether you think I'm crazy or not, but I'll come back to this slide toward the end of my program. Now, just to give you some background. Connie, my wife, who's sitting in the very back right there, is a science writer. She's written 4 science books. From Gaia to Selfish Genes and Evolution Extended are both MIT Press books. The Ghost of Evolution was Amazon.com's top recommended science book for 3 months when it came out in 2001. And Green Space, Green Time, The Way of Science is really about the spirituality of science. It's one of the leading books in what's called religious naturalism. It's how the ecological sciences and the evolutionary sciences can enrich your communion with reality. My background is in Christian ministry. I pastored 3 churches over the course of a decade. I also did sustainability education and personal empowerment training. And I've written 2 books, thank God for evolution, and my first book, which was written in 1990, called Earth Spirit. So where science, inspiration, and sustainability intersect, that's what we're passionate about. That's what our lives are about. We've been living on the road for 10 years. I don't know if you saw the side of our van when you came in. We've got the Jesus and Darwin fish kissing with hearts between them. Definitely gets us some interesting looks in conservative parts of the world. Got flipped off in Texas last time I was there. In fact, I pulled into Lawrence, Kansas, oh gosh, 8 or 9 years ago now, and a biology professor looked at the side of the van and he goes, "Oh great, you just piss everybody off." You know the science, you know the Creation Museum south of Cincinnati where they believe that the dinosaurs were with Noah on Noah's Ark? We were there for 2.5 hours. They had a security guard watch us the whole time. You don't know about these radical evolutionaries. Now the interesting thing is that Connie and I do the same programs in radically different contexts. We've spoken over 1,600 groups in the last 10 years, and I've spoken hundreds of times to all kinds of Christian groups, liberals, conservatives, Catholic, Protestant, evangelical. I've also spoken, we've both spoken hundreds of times at all kinds of secular groups and non-theistic and sometimes even anti-religious groups, groups of humanists, atheists, free thinkers. And I've spoken hundreds of times in New Thought, New Age, Integral, Eastern Enlightenment, Buddhist and Hindu. So even though these 3 groups are very, very different, the same sacred science presentations appeal to all 3. In fact, even when I do programs among evangelicals, which I don't get invited to do a lot, but when I do, usually about 90% of the people stay, which is to say that 10% don't stay to the end. But those who do stay ask a lot of great questions and they buy a lot of books and DVDs. And then they tell us afterwards, like a month or 2 later, what they got out of the program. So I'm encouraged that there's a perspective that radically different people from different metaphysical and theological vantage points can find inspiring. Because if we can't find ways of cooperating across ethnic, religious, and political differences in the next 30, 40 years, we're in serious trouble. So let's take a look at the trajectory of big history, human nature, and death and chaos. Let's take a look at these one at a time. The academic discipline of big history was started by David Christian about 25 years ago. And David Christian was also, he was really excited about Thomas Berry's work and Brian Swim's work and all the different scientific historical disciplines seen as one modern-day creation story. In fact, that's what big history is. It's physical evolution, biological evolution, and cultural evolution as one modern-day creation story, our very first evidence-based creation story. And this is a TED Talk that he did about 1.5 years ago, and it's just a tremendously, in fact, Connie and I watched a teaching company course that he did, a 48-hour or 48 half-hour teaching company course, and we thought it was the best educational experience we've ever had in our lives. Well, it turns out that the richest man in the world thinks the same thing. Bill Gates says this, he says, "I'm a power consumer of instructional videos, DVDs, and downloads on a wide range of subjects. But my favorite course of all time is called Big History, taught by David Christian. I wish everyone could take this course. Big History literally tells the story of the universe from the very beginning to the complex societies we have today. It shows how everything is connected to everything else. It weaves together insights and evidence from astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, history, economics, and more. We aim to make this great story curriculum freely available online to high school students throughout the world." And that's what the Big History Project is doing. And I cannot even begin to tell you how excited that Connie and I are about this. Now, when I talk about the trajectory of big history, I often use a phrase called nested emergence. Nested as nesting dolls, subatomic particles within atoms, within molecules, within cells, within organisms, within planets, within galaxies. This nested understanding of creativity, nobody debates. This is not arguable in the scientific community. And the nested emergence part is that we see greater complexity emerging over time out of lesser complexity. The universe has gone from simple to more complex, both in the pre-human world and then also in the human world. Greater complexity, greater interdependence, and greater cooperation at larger and at wider scale. And this is, again, there's no scientist in the world that I know of that would say this comes before this, or this comes before this, or this comes before this. But this is also not teleology. This is not saying that there's some intelligence outside the system that has pre-programmed it or is manipulating it and making it go this way. That's not what the evidence suggests. What the evidence suggests is that simply from the perspective of now looking back, we in fact see greater complexity, greater interdependence and cooperation at larger and wider scale, and that we're not separate from it. We're part of that process. Human cooperation once existed only within small family groups. Cooperative organizations expanded to produce multifamily bands, then tribes, then agricultural villages, cities, and empires, then nation states. Now, some forms of economic and social cooperation span the globe. So let's take a look at not what we believe about human nature, but what do we know evidentially? What is there just practically universal agreement about human nature? Well, I suggest there's 4 things. The first is that we're not separate from the universe and the earth, that we're hardwired for empathy and cooperation, but only with the in-group. That's why it's so important how we define the in-group. We are meaning makers, and the interesting thing is we have instincts for self-deception, which does make things interesting. And our deepest drives aren't matched for the world that we today have to live in. Our deepest drives are matching a world in which our ancestors used to live in and help them survive and reproduce in that kind of a world, but they're mismatched for today's conditions. And that's going to make sense of a lot of our struggles and challenges. So let's take a look at these one at a time. To say that we're not separate from the universe and the earth, well, 2 of the major thinkers in the last 100 years that have voiced that is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit paleontologist, and Julian Huxley, who wrote the foreword to Teilhard de Chardin's book, The Phenomenon of Man, or the human phenomenon. So here you've got a Roman Catholic theist and an atheist, one of the founders of the American Humanist Society, that actually both shared the same worldview. They both shared this sacred understanding that humans are the universe becoming conscious of itself. In fact, Brian Swimme is a professor of cosmology who's got these two great quotes that just help people sort of get this. He says, 4 billion years ago, Earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. Right? Earth was once molten rock, now it sings opera. And see, nobody put anything here. When the Bible talks about Genesis 2:7, God forming us from the dust of the ground and breathing into us the breath of life, that's a true story. It's a mythic, or what I call night language, way of describing the fact that we grow out of the dynamics of the planet itself, and it's reality as a whole that makes that possible. I mean, how could Moses have said it any other way, assuming he wrote that? Now, another one of my favorite quotes from Brian Swimme that's a little more audacious. He tries to take the entire history of the universe and sum it up in 2 sentences. I think you like it, but he says, you take a great cloud of hydrogen gas and you just leave it alone. And it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings. Now, if that's not a divine process, nothing is. Joanna Macy is one of my sheroes. You like that word, shero? I like it. She's got this amazing quote. She says, this shift, the shift from seeing ourselves as separate creatures that walk around on Earth in a universe, to seeing ourselves as a mode of being of Earth, an expression of the universe. She said, this shift is essential to our survival. It's a huge claim she's making. Because it can serve in lieu of morality, and because moralizing is so ineffective. She says, sermons seldom hinder us from pursuing our self-interest. I mean, as a preacher, I'm telling you, I can preach till I'm blue in the face, and people are going to do what's in their own perceived self-interest regardless of what comes from the pulpit. So what Joanna Macy says is we need to be a little more enlightened about what our self-interest is. For example, it would never occur to me to say to you, don't cut off your leg. No, really, don't cut off your leg, right? Because your leg's a part of you, and you know it. Joanna Macy says, so are the trees in the Amazon basin. There are external lungs. And that's what we're waking up to, is that we are our world. What we do to our world, we do to our larger body. We do to our larger self. Now, of course, this begs the question. If we're part of a larger body of life, what's our role? Is it merely to be good consumers? I had a medical doctor, an oncologist, one time tell me that a cancer cell is a normal cell that, for a variety of reasons, gets cut off or disconnected from its genetic memory, and it starts to think it's separate from the body. And if cancer consumes enough of the body, it'll not only kill the body, but it kills itself. And then he asked the question, what do we call our society? Don't we call it a consumer society? What does to consume mean? It means to eat up. Why are we eating up the planet? Is it because we're bad, rotten, evil, crummy, sinful people? Or is it like the cancer cell? We thought we were separate from it. We thought our true home was somewhere else after we died. We didn't know that we were it becoming conscious of itself. That humans are no more separate from the universe than an apple is separate from an apple tree. We're a fruit of the universe. We grow out of the universe just like apples grow out of an apple tree. And knowing this is like being reconnected to billions of years of divine wisdom. I believe that our destiny, if we are to have a viable destiny, I believe it's to become an immune system where human beings protect and foster and defend the health and the well-being of the larger body of life of which we're a part. And this isn't some pipe dream. In the next 30 to 40 years, we will have the know-how and the technology to be able to deflect incoming intruders, the things that wreak tremendous havoc and cause mass extinctions throughout Earth's history. And this is a vision that, in my experience, young people get excited about. Because my message used to be, I was an environmental activist for much of my adult life, my message used to be this: we're going to hell in a handbasket, we better get our shit together quick, the whole thing's going down. That doesn't inspire people. Did you ever notice? That does, and it certainly doesn't inspire young people. Forgive my French, please. But this vision, now when I speak to young people, I say you and your generation gets to play a heroic role in helping humans become an immune system. That's something they can get excited about because it's something that they can do positively. It's a positive vision of possibility. Now, to talk about us as being hardwired for empathy and cooperation, but only with the in-group, is to say that we have social instincts. Relationships are us. We are group animals, and like all other group animals, this is where love and kindness and consideration and care and compassion and generosity, all these pro-social feelings and pro-social behaviors emerge because of our group nature. Anybody who says that evolution just says we're all selfish doesn't understand this essential aspect of evolution. I love this image. It's one of my favorite images of all time. Evolutionary psychology and evolutionary brain science, together with primatology, the study of primates and humans cross-culturally, have helped us come to an understanding that there's certain things that are universal to apes and humans. One of them is that moral behavior emerges naturally. We do not need a cosmic carrot and a cosmic stick to motivate us to be good. Human nature is fundamentally empathic. That is, empathy and compassion is instinctual to about 98% of us. Unfortunately, there are about 2% of the human species is born without the mental capacity to feel empathy and compassion. Sociopaths and psychopaths, for example, don't feel empathy and compassion. Some forms of autism, they can't feel empathy and compassion. But for the other 98% of us, it's instinctual. Now, to talk about us as being meaning makers is to say that we have self-deceptive instincts. In fact, if you put into Google cognitive biases, you'll get the Wikipedia page of all the different ways that we are programmed to deceive ourselves. And the easiest way to just know this in your own experience, so you don't have to take my word on it, think about the last fight that you had with somebody you love. You were sure that you were right and they were wrong. And they were sure they were right and you were wrong. That's what we do. Yeah. We are inherent storytellers. We're always interpreting. And we don't experience reality as it is. We experience reality through the lens of our interpretation. And we use what I call night language, metaphors and poetry and analogies to interpret. We can't not interpret our experience. And our individual and collective interpretations profoundly affect the quality of our lives and our societies. By the way, this is from The Matrix, if you didn't happen to see that series. If there were one skill I wish I could impart to young people, or really anybody of any age, but especially young people, it would be like exercising a muscle, the skill of learning to interpret life generously. Because as I suspect most of you know, the main thing that will determine the quality of a person's life isn't what happens to them, it's how they interpret what happens to them. And political spin, that's what collective interpretation is about. The fate of nations can be impacted by how we collectively interpret. It matters. Now here's where the bulk of my program is going to be talking about is our mismatched drives, our mismatched instincts. In evolutionary brain science, we now have technologies like the functional MRI that allows us to see how the human brain is working while it's in the process of working. While somebody's thinking about their best friend, or somebody, you know, they're fantasizing about, or what they had for lunch yesterday, or their worst enemy. We can map out which parts of the brain are being used, where the blood flows are, where the neurons are firing. And one of the things that we now have is a pretty clear sense that our brain does not show evidence that it was designed by an all-knowing, supreme intelligent designer outside the universe that knew exactly how to design the perfect brain for humans to thrive in the world that we today have to live in. Instead, what our brain shows tremendous evidence of is that it was created, if you want to use a theological term, or it was evolved over millions of years, if you want to use a secular term, over vast expanses of time. We've got the most ancient part of our brain, more recent still, and then the most recent part. The reptilian brain is the brain stem and the cerebellum. This is the root of our physical instincts. You could say that this is our instincts for the 3 S's: safety, sustenance, and sex. Or you could say that what this part of the brain really cares about are the 5 F's: fight, flight, freeze, food, and copulate. Come on, I'm in a church. What do you expect? The old mammalian brain, the limbic system, this is the hippocampus, the amygdala, the hypothalamus. This is the part of the brain that's concerned with our social instincts. It's our relational nature. It's our instincts for caring and kindness and bonding and status, for looking good and not looking bad. Reptiles, frankly, don't care about that. Mammals care a lot about it. Right? Also play. You don't find reptiles playing in the way you find all mammals playing. The neocortex, only two new drives come into being with the neocortex. The drive to comprehend and the drive to predict. Now, why would evolution produce an organ that was really great at comprehending and predicting? So these parts of the brain can get what they want more effectively. It's why we're masters of self-deception. We're absolutely brilliant at, in fact, we are rationalizing animals. We are not rational animals. Seriously. And then the prefrontal cortex, this is the most recent part of the brain to develop. It's also, unfortunately, the last to develop in young people. It only fully develops between the age of 23 to 25. It's all about doing the harder thing. In fact, anytime you have to override your more base instincts, this is the part of the brain that's exercised. It's all about good judgment or poor judgment. And as I said, it doesn't fully develop until the age of 23 to 25. See, parents know this. Car insurance companies know this. Yes, they do. They've got the evidence. Because one of the things we know about young men, in fact, one of the things we know about all humans, is the higher the testosterone, which comes from this part of the brain, the more people take risks. It's a human universal. And so if you get young men that don't have good judgment, yet they got a lot of testosterone, it's not a surprise that men under the age of 25 are so much more expensive to insure. Now, this is pretty much standard day language. This is pretty much descriptive, scientific. It's sort of boring, but it's sort of day language. But Connie and I discovered years ago that if you want young people, like high school students and college students, and especially grade school kids, to think this stuff is cool and to talk to their peers about it, day language, just it ain't gonna do it. So we created some night language animals to help us out here. So we've got our lizard legacy, our fur little mammal, our monkey mind, and our higher porpoise. So again, the lizard legacy is safety, sustenance, the basics of survival, and then after puberty, reproduction. Fur little mammal is feelings, emotions, bonding, kinship, status, and play. Notice there's a demarcation here. What I'm trying to get at is it's not all warm fuzzies. There's something very dangerous that goes on in that part of the brain, and I already talked about it. It's in-group, out-group mentality. See, we love and care and cooperate with our kind of people, but we can demonize and hate them, right? Of course, we got stories doing the same thing. Every religion in the world has a sacred story to tell you why to behave very differently with the in-group than with the out-group. In fact, I'm going to use an example because we're in the Judeo-Christian West, but I'm not picking on any one group of people. You got to hear this. This is true of everybody. The 10 Commandments, the 6th commandment, thou shalt not kill. Who did that apply to? Yeah, the other Hebrews. It was okay to wipe out the Philistines. 20 million Canaanites, destroy them all, thus saith the Lord. Now again, I'm not picking on the Jews or the Hebrews. This is true of all cultures, and that's what's going on in this part of the brain. Monkey mind is a term that comes out of Buddhism. The monkey jumps from branch to branch, eats a little fruit, eats a little fruit. It's like a rational verbal part of the brain. Did you ever notice that we're not in the present moment for very long? We're thinking about the past. We're worried about the future. It's one of the reasons our meditation and mindfulness practices, our contemplative practices, are designed to take that ongoing meaning-making monkey mind and help it stay in the present moment a little bit more often. And then, of course, our higher porpoise is our sense of higher purpose. It's our sense of God's will, our higher power. In fact, if you hook up somebody to a functional MRI and you ask them to think about their marriage vows or what they're most committed to, this is the part of the brain that's stimulated. Now, if there's only 2 things that you remember about my evening program tonight. Oh, by the way, Connie did not take this picture. Virtually all the other pictures Connie took, as the nature shots all over North America for the last 10 years, but we got this one from the internet. So if there's only 2 things that you remember, please remember these 2 things: mismatched instincts and supernormal allurements. Mismatched instincts and supernormal allurements. So let's take a look at these. Understanding the fact that our instincts don't serve us necessarily, often, in the world that we today have to live in because they're not matched for this kind of world. They evolved over millions of years to serve us in a world in which we don't live in anymore. And that mismatch, understanding that, can go a long way towards helping us to understand some of the things that we find challenging and problematic about ourselves and each other. Now, there was a book that was published 2 years ago called Supernormal Stimuli: How Primal Urges Overran Their Evolutionary Purpose by Deirdre Barrett, who teaches at Harvard. Deirdre Barrett said, well, let me say this. In case it's not obvious, this is not food. You will never find anything like this in the natural world. This is a concentration of food-like items that we are evolutionarily programmed to pay attention to and to want more of. In fact, Deirdre Barrett says almost everyone will overeat if dining on supernormal stimuli. They've taken eggs, and they've done this for many different kinds of birds, where if you replace the normal egg with a ceramic egg or a wooden egg, but if it's slightly bigger or brighter or more pronounced markings, the bird will always sit on the fake egg. It will ignore its own eggs and it never learns. It's supernormal stimuli. Bees will become addicted to cocaine. Roundworms will become addicted to nicotine. I love this quote from Deirdre Barrett. She said, the most dangerous aspect of our modern diet arises from our ability to refine food. This is the link to drug, alcohol, and tobacco addictions. Coca doesn't give South American Indians health problems when they brew or chew it. No one's ruined his life eating poppy seeds. When grapes and grains were fermented lightly and occasionally they presented a healthy pleasure, not a hazard. Salt, fat, sugar, and starch are not harmful in their natural contexts. It's our modern ability to concentrate things like cocaine, heroin, alcohol, and food components that turns them into a menace that our bodies are hardwired to crave. I mean, think about it. What was there to be addicted to 10,000 years ago? Were you going to run into some fermented berries? Hard liquor wasn't even invented until 300 years ago. And yet today, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, video games, shopping, internet porn, Facebook, social networking sites, romance novels, and so much more that our ancestors never had to deal with. Ever. And this stuff is like the bigger egg. Did any of you see Newsweek last month? Cover article in Newsweek. iCrazy. Panic, depression, psychosis. How connectivity addiction is rewiring our brains. This is a big deal. And it's not just America. The Chinese government are investing massive amounts of money to try to figure out how to deal with this. Did you know that the average age of a boy who seeks out porn online is the age of 8? By the time they're 11, virtually all boys are masturbating regularly to porn, even if they haven't reached puberty yet. And by the time they're 18 or 19, massive numbers of them have erectile dysfunction. This is the first time in human history that teenagers can't get it up without porn. They don't have no way of relating to girls who want to do things like talk and touch. This is epidemic. This is worldwide. It's supernormal stimuli. Now, I don't want to leave you with the bad news, okay? Because there is some good news here. We all have inherited proclivities. We all have an unchosen nature. Right? Sounds like the tradition. We're going to come to that. And the good news is that we can finally honor reality in the way that the ancients couldn't have possibly done. Because we now know that if our ancestors didn't have the very same instincts that we sometimes can find challenging living in a modern world, we wouldn't be alive. Let me say that again, because it's really important that you let this into your gut. If your ancestors didn't have the very same instincts that you and your children and grandchildren sometimes find challenging, you wouldn't be alive, nor would they. And when we can be grateful for that, it can transform our lives, because most of us, I don't know of any Christian, Muslim, or Jew that's genuinely grateful for their sinful nature. The traditional story doesn't get you to gratitude. We now have a way of getting us to gratitude. I'll come back to this. Let me give you a couple examples of this mismatch. We all have cravings for sugar, salts, and fats. Why is that? Well, it's because for 99% of human history, it wasn't easy to find sugar, salts, and fats. So having a craving for them allowed our ancestors to survive long enough to reproduce. Yet today, we are surrounded by foods that have sugar, salts, and fats, yet we still have the cravings as though they were rare. It's a mismatch. Not one of us in this room would be alive today, not one of us, if some of our ancestors weren't really, really good at putting on weight. So you know what weight is? Weight is stored energy. Storing energy as fat, because all of our ancestors had to go through droughts, through harsh winters, through lean times. In fact, humans that couldn't do that got lost to the gene pool. And our ancestors were so generous, they passed those genes on to us. It's our unchosen nature. I mentioned before about testosterone as a human universal. Risk-taking rises, right? Well, it's not just risk-taking. The higher the testosterone in men and women both, the more people obsess about sex and they think about sex. In fact, you can take people who are risk-averse and hardly ever think about sex. You give them testosterone, they're going to have sex on the brain and take all kinds of risks. Connie and I stayed with a couple in San Francisco area, actually in Marin County, and we were talking about this, and the woman confided in us, and she said that several years earlier, her doctor had put her on hormonal therapy, testosterone patches, and she said after 2 days, she said, I couldn't stop thinking about sex. She said, is this what guys have to deal with? Well, the answer is yes, it is actually. And it's not just guys. See, women also have testosterone, and but typically, men have 10 to 20 times the testosterone, but it plays out over a bell curve. It's not true for all men or all women. Some women have more testosterone than lots of guys. In fact, my daughter is life's ever-present reminder to me that there's a wisdom larger than my ego at work. I was a peace activist for much of my adult life. Take a guess at what my oldest daughter does in the world. Yeah, she's a staff sergeant, worse. She's a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. Not only that, but my daughter is the second woman in U.S. history to be on the all-Marine wrestling team. That's right, my baby girl wrestles for the Marine Corps and kicks butt, right? And her pacifist daddy is so damn proud of her. She's the one that gave birth to my granddaughter, by the way. Now, I'm going to show a series of 3 images that was sent to me in an email a few years ago. Some of you may have seen it. And unfortunately, I hope it doesn't offend anybody, but it's unfortunately typical male behavior. Here we have a statue of a bison and a real male adolescent moose. And here we have typical male behavior. Now, guys, before you laugh too hard, at least this bison is 3-dimensional. The woman who sent this, she said in the email, she said, is this statutory rape? Or is it merely a moose demeanor? I know, pretty bad. The interesting thing is, just the other day, like 3 days ago in Big Sky, Montana, we had dinner with some people. They drove us by this house. We actually saw this statue. Like, that was cool, because I haven't shown this image for about 4 years. Now, the interesting thing is, as status rises, so does testosterone. This is true for all men, gay and straight, and it's true for about half women. So it's not true for all women, but it's true for all men. So what this means is that when we become a sports star, or a megachurch pastor, or get elected into public office, right? What this means, among other things, is that we can expect to encounter difficulty with self and others, in part because you have deeper competing drives that often have their own agenda. Now, I need to make sure that I'm not misunderstood. I'm not saying that the conservatives and the fundamentalists get to say, the devil made me do it. And you know, we on the more liberal side of things get to say, my lizard legacy made me do it. No, I'm not saying that, because it may not be your fault, but it is absolutely your responsibility. It's each of our responsibility. Nobody gets off the hook. This doesn't make it easier for men or anybody else, for that matter, to be out of integrity. In fact, in my experience, it makes it much easier to live in integrity. Let me tell you a true story. When the New York Times Magazine did a feature article on my book about 3.5 years ago, they interviewed this 81-year-old man who came to my program in northern Florida. Now again, he's 81 years old, and I did the brain science during the church sermon. And he comes up to me after the sermon, and he's practically vibrating. The guy's so excited. He says, Michael, he said, I got to tell you something I've never told anybody. Now, I don't know about you, but when somebody who's 81 years old is going to tell me something they've never told anybody, I'm all ears, right? I was like, please tell me. He said in 1973, he said, I became the vice president of my corporation. Now, it turns out this was an enormous corporation. This guy's testosterone went sky high. He said, I had no idea until your sermon why my life began unraveling almost immediately. He said, I had been married for 13 years. He said, I'd never betrayed my wife. He said, to be honest, I'd never been seriously tempted. But he said, within 6 months of my promotion, he said, I had 5 affairs. None of them knew about each other. My wife didn't know about any of them. He said, it ultimately cost me my marriage. It cost me my job. And he said, I've been living with the guilt and the shame of this for 35 years. He said, I haven't told anybody, even a therapist, till I'm telling you right now. Can you imagine how free this guy must have felt? In fact, he told me, he said, it feels like I can let go of the boatloads of self-judgment and guilt and start cleaning things up. And to his credit, he did. Between Sunday morning, which is when I did the sermon, and Tuesday night, which is when I did the evening program like I'm doing here, he called his ex-wife that he hadn't talked to her in 9 years. He said, I apologize. He said, I was in tears. He said, I apologize for being such a deceptive, lying sack. Came back to integrity. To use Christian night language, he came back to Christ. He came back to integrity. And I found out 3 months later from his roommate that his depression of the last 15 years had lifted. He wasn't even on the medication anymore. Now, he wasn't a Christian, he was a humanist, he was an atheist. This is a Unitarian Universalist church, but he told me, he said, it feels like I've had a born-again experience. He said, it feels like I've got a new lease on life, and here I'm 81 years old. Here's a guy with a grip on his lizard legacy. Connie and I stayed at his house, and Connie, he had this pet snake, and Connie said, oh, let me take this picture. Now, this isn't just about men. There was a woman who sent Connie an email. She said, I could never understand my crazy, destructive drives, why I ate so much when I was full, and why I fell in love with the wrong men. But with an understanding of evolution, it now all makes sense. In fact, let me say something about why women occasionally fall in love with the wrong men. Connie coached me, and she said, always take a drink of water then, because then I have all the women's attention. I took the coaching. What I'm about to say is not true for all women, but it's true for the vast majority, about 85% women. When most women who are in their fertile childbearing years, okay, after puberty and before menopause, when most women are in their fertile years, when they're in the presence of a high-status male, the women's testosterone levels will spike. It'll double or triple or quadruple. So they're going to take greater risks, they're going to think more about sex, and they've got self-deceptive instincts to convince themselves that they're not being more flirtatious. In fact, there was a woman who came up to me. I did a program at one of the most prestigious Presbyterian churches in the United States, just outside of Philadelphia. And there was a very attractive woman, middle-aged. She came up to me after, first of all, she waited till everybody else left. And then she comes up to me and she says, Michael, thank you for talking about women's testosterone levels around high-status men, because you made sense of something that happened to me back in 1993. She said, I was living in one of the wealthiest sections of Philadelphia. She said, I had 2 children at the time, and she said, Bill Clinton's motorcade went right down my street, drove right down the street, and she said, he had the window down, I could see him. And she said, this wave washed over me. And she said, had he stopped, I would have had to given myself to him. And she said, I was a happily married woman. There was a woman in New Orleans that said, she's now in her 70s, I think, that we were staying with. And she said that when her doctor, when she was a teenager, she was having some kind of hormonal problem, and her doctor had put her on testosterone, and she said all the boys at school started looking really good. Understanding human cooperation, or understanding human instincts, encourages compassion and cooperation because it explores what we all have in common, human universals. In fact, there was another woman that came up to Connie and said that she had just earned her doctorate in neurobiology. And she said, you know, the amazing thing is, the more I learn about how the brain works, she said, the more compassion that I have for myself and others. She said, isn't it amazing and somewhat ironic that science is giving us access to this traditional spiritual virtue? I love this one. The universe becomes self-conscious. Eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce. What's it all about? And we wonder why we occasionally struggle with issues related to food safety and sex. I mean, duh. It takes a lot of courage in this culture to walk into a group of strangers and say, hi, my name is Michael, I'm an overeater. Or hi, my name is Michael, I'm a codependent, or I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a sex addict, or I'm a gambling addict. What's true is, hi, my name is Michael, and I'm a human being with mismatched instincts surrounded by supernormal allurements. And you know something, folks? That's true for you too. It's a human universal. And see, this removes the stigma. It's not just the addicts and the codependents among us, it's true for all of us. In fact, I'm going to invite you to put your own name. So let's say this together, and feel free to put your own name. You don't have to do this, but, okay, right? Hi, my name is Michael, and I'm a human being with mismatched instincts surrounded by supernormal allurements. Amen. That wasn't too tough, was it? No matter what it is that we find challenging, depressing, overwhelming, whatever we're tempted by, whatever we struggle with, we all know relationships can be difficult. And why is it that not just our political leaders and our sports stars, but also our religious leaders so often fall victim to sexual scandal? Like, what's this all about? Well, our understanding of human nature is at root of all this stuff. And if these are our best words for talking about human nature, these are inadequate. They're all pre-evolutionary understandings. None of these is, I mean, they can all still be helpful, but they're inadequate. And it's not just our personal issues. Our collective issues have an understanding of human nature at root of it. That's one of the reasons why Connie and I are so passionate about this particular topic. It's kind of like, you know, imagine you've got a really spiffy car, a really nice car, but it's running so ragged, it's running so poorly that it's hardly running at all. It's like limping along. But you've never opened up the hood, and you don't know anything about the history of the internal combustion engine. So you're just making up stories about what might be wrong. It's the homunculus. It's the inner demons. Oh, it's got to be the unevolved ego. Right? They're just making up stories. Again, we've got to learn to, basically what we've got to do is we've got to be able to open up the hood and get an instruction manual and understand what's going on, including what just went through your mind just right then. The parable of the pickle jar. Halsey Barlow is my wife's niece. Now, Halsey grew up in a very conservative Roman Catholic family. Her mother and father listened to Rush Limbaugh every day. And she went to nursing school, and she wrote a paper on Madagascan lemurs. And she had this epiphany. She said, I saw how beautiful evolution was. And then she started reading books like this one by Robert Wright, The Moral Animal, Why We Are the Way We Are, The New Science of Evolutionary Psychology. And even though this book was written 18 years ago, it's still one of the best books in evolutionary psychology. And she sent us this email. We call it The Parable of the Pickle Jar. She said, I now put everything into an evolutionary context. It's almost become a reaction that when I encounter a situation, I think, okay, why am I feeling this way? How and why would my 780th great-grandmother react to this? It doesn't even have to be anything significant. For instance, if I see one of my roommates snacking on my jar of pickles, I get this feeling in my stomach like, hey, back off, those are mine, mine, mine. I want to be laid back and not care, but my instincts are so darn uptight. But knowing that I'm a selfish, status-seeking hornball only motivates me to do things that say F you to my evolutionary roots, even though I really do love them. I absolutely love how imperfect and clumsy we are as humans. I mean, almost any situation can be laughed off if we only step back and take a look at why we feel the way that we do. I love it. I wouldn't want it any other way. Now, is that extraordinary for an 18-year-old to have that level of witness? See, even though this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex or the higher corpus, isn't fully developed until the age of 23 to 25, it was enough developed in this 18-year-old, because that's where the witness capacity happens. Sending our teenagers, our young people, out into the world without teaching them about mismatched instincts and supernormal allurements would be like 20,000 years ago sending them out into the world without telling them about saber-toothed cats. It's insane. It's crazy. That's why I did a shorter version of this program on as a TED Talk. Just put Michael Dowd TEDx. It's a 20-minute version of this. Please share it with your young people. Now, here's one of the only theological things I'm going to say, is that this perspective naturalizes or realizes ancient mythic insights, such as, for example, the fall of Adam and Eve and original sin. Prior to microscopes, it wasn't just difficult to understand infection. Before we could see bacteria, it wasn't difficult to understand infection. It was impossible to understand infection. Prior to telescopes, before we could even see other galaxies, when we thought that the entire universe was the Milky Way, it wasn't difficult to understand the structure of the universe. It was completely impossible. Well, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, it wasn't difficult to understand our evolved brain. It was utterly impossible. But what you would have understood is what we all know through our experience, which is we all say, I'll do that, but we don't. We say, oh, I'll never do that, but we do. We say, you can count on me for that, but they couldn't. What's that about? Well, the fall of Adam and Eve, original sin, are spot on, accurate night language about what we can now speak about in a natural, factual, day language way. I mean, in the Christian tradition, the Apostle Paul probably said it best. He said, I'm a slave to sin. I really don't understand myself. I have the desire to do what is good, but I don't do it. What I end up doing is not the good I want to do, but what I hate to do. What a wretched man am I. I believe that history will show that the greatest psychological and spiritual revelation or realization, however you want to talk about it, of the 20th century was the discovery that human beings have powerful, indeed compelling instincts, just like all other animals do. And that if we don't understand, appreciate, and respectfully manage, that is, honor and harness our inherited drives, we are bound to be enslaved to them. It's like that old adage, what you resist persists. You know that old saying, right? Well, what you can honor, what you can be grateful for, can empower you. And here's where the emotional and practical benefits of an evolutionary worldview come blazingly into focus. We can have gratitude for what we've inherited because, again, remember, if your ancestors didn't have these very same instincts that you sometimes are challenged by, and your children and grandchildren, you and they wouldn't be alive. So to be able, we can finally honor what's real rather than simply feel guilty or ashamed or judgmental about it. We can move beyond denial, guilt, and resentment because it's like, of course, of course, of course. It's like when I see an attractive young woman now, it's like, of course I think she should be carrying my baby. It's like, duh, right? But because I have no judgment and guilt about it, it makes it easy to be in impeccable integrity. I'm not tempted to be flirtatious because I don't have any judgment about what's going on inside of me. We can have compassion for self and others in ways that are very difficult without this understanding. We can heal broken relationships. In fact, healing broken relationships becomes almost a no-brainer. And we can develop a witness capacity that isn't the same as the witness capacity of sitting on a cushion meditating. It's the witness capacity of understanding what's driving us and why. So let me shift to the last thing that I'll talk about, and then we'll open it up for questions, which is the gifts of chaos and death in an evolving cosmos. Oh, this is to remind me that Connie and I, about somewhere between 6 and 8 times a year, we send out an email newsletter of all the new stuff that we've added to our websites and the things that we find out about in this movement. I'm going to circulate a couple of clipboards. So if you put your name and email address down, I promise you'll never get more than 1 email a month. In fact, it'll usually be a lot less than that. And you can get off the list anytime you want. And we don't give your email address out to anybody. By the way, this is our main website, thegreatstory.org. So what I'm going to zip through in about 5 or 6 minutes, Connie spends an hour and 10 minutes on in this DVD called Death Through Deep Time Eyes. And I think this is her most important legacy, is this understanding. Because it makes a profound difference both personally and in families, but also in terms of how we view, in terms of culturally. I think this is one of the biggest issues that our culture needs to deal with, is how we think about death. Do we view death as the problem, as the enemy, to put off as long as possible? Do we view it as unnatural? Do we view it as humans are responsible for the existence of death in the universe? Actually, let me back up. Connie, in this DVD, she takes a look at the major sciences that have anything to do with death. Paleontology, evolutionary biology, embryology, cell biology and ecology, astronomy and astrophysics, geology and geography and math, and takes a look at the major discoveries in each of these areas that have helped us come to an understanding that there's not only nothing wrong with death, there's something profoundly right with death from God's perspective, from the perspective of reality as a whole, that we couldn't have known about, the Apostle Paul didn't know about. I mean, for example, we now know that mountains die, oceans die, continents die. Jesus didn't know this. Moses didn't know this. Muhammad didn't know this. This has been revealed through evidence only recently, the last couple hundred years. Without the death of species, I'm not talking about just individuals, I'm talking about the death of entire species, there would be no complex life beyond pond scum. Now, I've got nothing against pond scum. But when you compare it to the world we actually live in, this incredibly majestic world is possible only because 99% of the species that have ever existed are no longer here. Now, I need to make sure I'm not misunderstood again, which is Connie and I are passionately committed to preserving as many species as possible. We believe that we should be promoting biodiversity because the healthier, the more complex the body of life, the healthier. When we lose species, especially at the rate that we are now, we're in like what many scientists call the 6th great mass extinction. This is not good. So I'm not saying that we're for extinction. But what I am saying is that Charles Darwin helped us understand the positive role of extinctions. And even that we've only known about for 200 years. We've only known about extinctions for 200 years. We didn't even start finding fossils like this until about 140 or 160 years ago. Without the death of fetal cells in embryonic stage of development, we'd all be spheres. The reason we have shape is because cells died here, 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 and here. Without the death of plants and animals, there would be no food. Without the death of stars, there would be no periodic table of elements, no planets, no life. In supernovas and red giant explosions, that's where the atoms are formed. Without the death of elders, there would be no room for children. I mean, think about it. Once we understood that we had a finite world, not an infinite world, right? But a finite world, if you want a world of children, you have to have the death of elders. Because think about it. In a finite world, if all you got is birth with no death, very quickly you're wall-to-wall people, wall-to-wall skunks, wall-to-wall bacteria 60 feet deep. Doesn't take long. Death is essential on a finite planet. And again, Jesus didn't know this. The Apostle Paul didn't know this. Death is natural and generative at every level of reality. Death is no less sacred than life. And see, this perspective doesn't take away the pain and the grief of death, which is natural, it's normal, but it gives it a cosmic container. It allows us to trust that humans aren't responsible for the existence of death in the universe. And see, this brings up the whole notion of what is an honorable death? What is a dishonorable death? This is an important issue that we're now going to have to deal with as a society. In fact, David Brooks, New York Times columnist, he wrote back about a year ago, he wrote a piece called Death and Budgets. He said, we think the budget mess is a squabble between partisans in Washington, but in large measure it's about our inability to face death and our willingness as a nation to spend whatever it takes to push it just slightly over the horizon. See, we now have supernormal medical technologies. Our ancestors never had to say no to this. This is supernormal. And let me make sure that this is clear. Unless we consciously say no to this, in our final months, this is what will be virtually all of us, unless we're killed instantaneously in a car wreck. And at what cost? We're bankrupting the young generations because we have the technology to be able to keep people alive for a more number of days, regardless of the quality of life. And I'm not saying there's easy answers to this, but this is something we've got to wrestle with together from a sacred understanding of death, which is not what our culture has right now. Until we grasp that death plays a vital and necessary role in an evolving cosmos, Christianity will continue to be shackled by unnatural, otherworldly notions of the gospel, as if the gospel, the great news, was merely cosmic fire insurance. Medical technologies will continue to prolong physical and emotional suffering and provoke family discord, and the medical industry will continue to underwrite the widening gap between the rich and the poor. Few things are more important than transforming how we view death. Now, the same is true of chaos. I grew up Catholic. You can't get the Catholic out of me, right? This is my cosmic rosary. I've got 269 of the major transformational moments in the history of the universe represented in beads. Each bead signifies some significant event in the universe story. I call them grace moments because almost all of them were chaotic, that led to the emergence of something new. And I have the major catastrophes, the major extinctions, the major violent, chaotic, destructive episodes represented in beads. Because one of the things we now understand is that the main thing, like perhaps the number one thing that has catalyzed creative transformation for billions of years is chaos, breakdowns, and bad news. Nothing's more important. And see, knowing this builds my faith. Not faith as beliefs. I'm not a believer. I'm not a religious believer. I'm a religious knower. Faith is trust. I have trust that the chaos of my life, the chaos of our culture, the chaos of our times is not a cosmic mistake, and that creativity can emerge out of that. And see, this isn't just some academic enterprise. This was me, as some of you know, just 3 years ago. I went through cancer treatment. I had diffuse large B-cell lymphoma with a tumor the size of my fist in my spleen. And I went through 6 rounds of chemotherapy and then had my spleen removed. Fortunately, I've had 3 CAT scans since that have showed no sign of cancer, so I'm very hopeful. But even when I was looking at the possibility that I could die in the next month, and there was a period of several weeks where we didn't know whether the chemotherapy was going to work, and I was looking at the possibility I could die very soon. And even when that was the case, I had what religious people call the peace that passes understanding. And it wasn't because I was holding out hope for pearly gates and mansions when I died. I'm a religious naturalist. I believe that where we go to when we die is the same place we came from before we were born. And whether you speak of that as coming from nothing and returning to nothing, or coming from God and returning to God, or coming from mystery and returning to mystery, I think all of those are legitimate ways of talking about it. But if where I go to when I die isn't the very same place that all other plants and animals and bacteria have gone to, I'm going to be pissed. And yet I had this deep and profound peace and joy, just joy from the gratitude of having lived, and total trust, which to my mind, what faith is, real faith, is trusting that whatever happens on the other side of death is just fine. And I'm eternally grateful that I was kept alive. This is my granddaughter at about the age of 30 hours. I had her naked up against my chest. It's one of the holiest moments of my life. So the only other theological thing I'm going to say is this, is that an evidential view of reality completely dissolves the theist-atheist debate. Just dissolves it. Because it transcends belief or disbelief. See, theism, I believe in God. Atheism, I don't believe in God. We don't need to believe anymore. Could you imagine how absurd it would be if somebody came up and said, excuse me, ma'am, do you believe in life? How about you, sir? Do you believe in the universe? It doesn't matter whether we believe in life or whether we believe in the universe. We're part of life. We're an expression of the universe. What somebody says, however, about life, that is believable or not. Somebody can say, life is so kind and wonderful. Somebody else says, life sucks, it's terrible. Well, that's believable or not, depending upon how you interpret life, right? But the fact of life just is. It doesn't matter whether you believe in reality or not. Reality is something that every plant, every animal, and every human being cannot not experience, inwardly and outwardly. That's why I love this quote from Philip K. Dick. He says, reality is that which when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. And from an evolution theology perspective, that's what we're pointing to. And I don't believe in reality or not believe in reality. Reality just is. And being in that relationship to reality is what it's all about. For example, I'm going to use day language, secular language, and I'm going to use night language, religious language. And you're going to see both are legitimate. You can't understand how reality or God created complex life if you don't understand extinctions. You can't understand how reality or God created lakes in the northern part of the world or healthy soil if you don't understand glaciers. You can't understand how God or reality created the periodic table of elements or planets or life if you don't understand red giants and supernova explosions. Watch this image very carefully. You surely cannot understand how God or reality created continents and oceans and mountains if you don't understand plate tectonics. Folks, we've known about this since 1964. Jesus did not know about this. Muhammad, I'm serious, all the religious leaders of the past, Martin Luther, nobody, no pope in the past knew about this. This has been revealed through evidence. And we don't believe that the Atlantic Ocean is growing at the same rate your fingernails grow. We know it. We've got the satellites to measure exactly how fast the Atlantic Ocean is growing and how fast the Pacific Ocean is shrinking. Evidence is how God or reality is speaking today. Evidence is modern day scripture. Evidence is our main source of divine guidance today. Which is not to say that reality doesn't still communicate to us in our dreams and intuitions, but how reality is communicating to the entire species is through evidence. So what I suggested was that when we have our best evidential understanding of these three things, we can have an inspiring vision of the future. Now, what I mean about humanity's rite of passage is that I believe that we collectively are going through the same thing that we all individually have gone through in our process of maturing from childhood through adulthood. As children, we're guided by beliefs, right? Children are sponges for beliefs. We will believe anything that trusted elders tell us. That's what we're programmed to believe, anything that's told to us. That's why where you're born in the world is the primary determinant of what your religion's going to be, because you'll believe anything that's told to you. But then as teenagers, we start questioning some of those beliefs. And then as healthy adults, we realize, most of us, that we're not just guided by what was spoon-fed to us as children, but we're guided by what we have evidence for and what matches our experience and the experience of others, including others outside our in-group. And our species is going through that. For virtually all of human history, we were guided by beliefs. That's all we had. We didn't have knowledge. What we're now starting to be guided by is knowledge in a way that's helping the belief systems evolve. Now, the other thing is that it's not all about you. Children think they're the center of the universe, right? The whole universe revolves around them. In fact, even teenagers usually think they're still the center of the universe. But as healthy adults, we realize that how we will be remembered by history is whether we make a difference in the world or not, whether we're a contribution or not. In other words, whether we're a blessing to the world or to others or not. That's how we will be remembered. That's the mark of the meaning of our life. And our species is going through that. For all of human history, every culture thought that the world was made for us. And what we're now realizing is that we were made for the world. No matter what our attempts to inform, it is our ability to inspire that will turn the tides. Now, I'm almost 6'1", okay? I'm about 6.5 feet. These guys are tall. The guy on the left is John Mather. He's NASA's senior astrophysicist. He's the 2006 Nobel Prize winner in physics. The guy on the right is Craig Mello. He's the 2006 Nobel Prize winner in medicine and physiology. The reason that they invited me to the Library of Congress is they both had read my book, and they were doing a program at the Library of Congress called The Origins and Evolution of Life in the Universe. And Craig sent me an email. He said, Michael, you got to come to the Library of Congress and get your picture taken with us. He said, it'll be great for your book. I was in Phoenix. I flew from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. to get this picture taken. Here's what they said about my book. John Mather said, the universe took 13.7 billion years to produce this amazing book. I heartily recommend it. Folks, as an author, it just don't get a hell of a lot better than that. Craig Mello said, the science versus religion debate is over. A must-read for all, including scientists. Now, this hasn't gotten me on Oprah yet, but I did meet with the producers of Oprah, so we'll see. But we did create an 80-second book trailer. I wanted to share that with you. When my book went to print, there was 5 Nobel laureates. Well, about a year and a half ago, Charles Towns, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1964 for the invention of the laser, he's 96 years old. He calls me on my cell phone. He says, I finally got around to reading your book. He said, I love it. So we got 6. So I'd love to hear, you've heard a lot from me, I'd love to hear what, if anything, did you find helpful, interesting, or inspiring? And then what difference do you think it would make if religious institutions celebrated evidence as God's word or divine guidance or modern day scripture? So I prefer to ask questions, but I'd also love to hear any responses that you might have to these 2 questions.
If you wouldn't mind using the mic so we could all hear your questions. Do we have it? Oh, come on, Jack.
I think that second statement, that if we could convert to that, it would make all the difference in the world, especially with young people. Because I think they suspect, they intuit that.
It's interesting that you should say that. I met with a group of clergy earlier today, and one of the things that we now do have evidence for is that one of the main reasons that young people are giving for leaving the churches or just not even coming in the first place is because of how clueless most religious institutions are around science and the seeming war between science and faith. And I agree with you completely. Yes, right over here.
Have you read the book, The Righteous Line?
Yes. In fact, John Haidt's a friend of mine. Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Happiness Hypothesis, which is probably one of the best 20 books I've ever read in my life. His most recent book is called The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Differ on Politics and Religion. I highly recommend it. In fact, if you look at the back of the book, I'm one of the blurbers.
Noticed that. But I guess it was, you know, having had 2 political conventions in the last, 2 weeks, it's stark in my mind, anyway, the difference between the more liberal and the more conservative. And in some ways, you provide a bridge that we could use to communicate one with another. And I'd just be interested in your talking about that perhaps a bit more.
Yeah, let me say something about that because, sometimes because I speak much more often in moderate to liberal settings than I do conservative settings, so people just assume that I'm a liberal. And that's probably true to some degree, but I'm actually an evolutionary. And by saying that I'm an evolutionary, what I mean is that both the conservative impulse and the liberal or the progressive impulse are essential for evolution. Liberals who trash conservatives and conservatives who trash liberals, neither one of them get evolution. Because evolution, if it's, for example, DNA, if DNA is anything, it's conservative. It holds on to the learnings, the things that worked in the past. That impulse to hold on to what worked, what we could count on, is an essential aspect of evolution, including cultural evolution. Conservatives are necessary. But the liberal or the progressive impulse to move beyond what has been before, to create anew, to widen the circles of inclusion and in-group, that also is essential to evolution. So what I sometimes say is on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm conservative. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I'm a liberal. On Sunday, I flip a coin. And I'm not just being funny, because I'm not liberal on all issues. And that's why I love that book by Jonathan Haidt. Because it's not like evolution or science is a liberal issue. Nonsense. Science isn't a human issue. Evolution and ecology are human issues. And frankly, there's lots and lots and lots of conservatives, millions of conservatives, politically conservative people that totally get what I'm talking about here, and fully align with it. Well, I'll tell you what, I want to show.
We have one.
Because there's something I want to show if I have time, and it looks like I do have time, so I'm excited about it.
I would be interested in knowing your thoughts about the whole issue from the evolutionary practical reality of war and that reptilian brain, how you see that movement through the last, say, 100, 200 years.
Yeah. The 2 best books that I have read that deal with war, well, first of all, I really am someone who is promoting peace. I believe that I believe that the conflictual part of human nature is part of our human nature. We're going to have conflict. But in a world where weapons of mass destruction are getting smaller and smaller, smarter and smarter, and ever more powerful, we've got to find nonviolent ways of dealing with our conflictual nature. So I'm very much promoting nonviolent ways of being and communication and whatever. But I also know that, like Thomas Berry, my mentor, said, evolution does not proceed by peace and tranquility. It proceeds with the greatest amount of conflict or tension that the system or the organism can creatively bear. So, in church services where people pass the peace, there's this little demon in the back of my head that what I wish to say, I don't usually have the balls to do this, but what I wish to say isn't, peace be with you. What I really would love to say is, I wish you the greatest amount of conflict or tension that you can creatively bear, because I want you to evolve, But the 2 best books that I've read on this issue, Robert Wright's book, Non-Zero. Okay, he was the guy that wrote The Moral Animal. But his book after that was called Non-Zero, which is one of the best 10 books I've ever read in my life. It's about this direction, and he has his way of helping see that warfare and conflict have consistently, over the course of human history, forced us to cooperate at larger and wider scale. And the other thing is Steven Pinker's latest book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Decreased. And it's a survey of violence throughout human history and how and why it's decreased. So I highly recommend both of those. I love this quote from Carl Sagan. He says, "Science is at least in part informed worship." Science is at least in part Informed worship. Well, many people consider Neil deGrasse Tyson to be kind of like the Carl Sagan of today. He's one of the main popularizers of science. He's on the NOVA, and he's the director of the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History. Here he is with Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. But here's a little 7-minute video clip that Connie, my wife, is the one that mashed this together. He's responding to Richard Dawkins at a Beyond Belief conference. And he uses a blend of day and night language. You're going to see that he's saying some of the same things that we're saying. Many people consider this little 7-minute video clip the highlight of my evening program. I don't mind.
So now I'm becoming a scientist. I'm in college majoring in physics. I go to graduate school, get the PhD in astrophysics. It's my life love. I've known this since I was a kid. I didn't accidentally land at the Bronx High School of Science. I knew, but I wanted to become an astrophysicist not because I chose it. In a way, the universe chose me. That first day in the Hayden Planetarium at age 9 as a kid, and I looked up and the lights dimmed and the stars came out. And I was called by the universe. I had no choice in the matter. I became a student of the universe with the ambition of one day being one of its participants in research on the frontier of cosmic discovery. And that ambition, that inculcation, stayed with me the whole time. To the point where when you become an astrophysicist, when you become a scientist at all, here's what I'm putting back to you. Because you would go on pilgrimages to mountaintops, because that's where your telescopes are. And where is the mountain? The mountain is far away from any city, because cities have lights and pollution and other things that interfere with your views. So by construct, the best telescopic observing sites are far removed from civilization. Then you get to the mountaintop. And what do you have to do next? You have to then start going nocturnal. The day is now your night, and the night is your day. And so that's part of the pilgrimage. There's the effort of the travel, and then there's the effort of flipping your schedule and going nocturnal. Then there's the telescope itself, this conduit to the cosmos. It's a physical, it's a tube. It's a conduit. And I sit there and I reflect on it. My specialty was the center of the Milky Way galaxy, 30,000 light years away. And so I have my digital detectors, I've got the telescope, it's dark, it's just me on this mountain and the universe. And I look up and I just think to myself, there are photons that have been traveling for 30,000 years. And I'm sort of snatching them from this journey and planting them into my digital detector. And then I started feeling bad for the photon, and I said maybe it wanted to continue, but I got in its way. But then I said no, those are probably happier photons than the one that slammed into the mountainside, that will go unanalyzed and will not contribute to the depth of our understanding of the universe. But so there's not only the fact that I'm on the mountaintop, there's the knowledge and the feeling that I'm reaching out to the universe with these methods and tools of science. And then add to that the sum of 20th century knowledge about the origin of the chemical elements, something the chemist would not be able to answer without the help of the astrophysicist. You can't go to the chemist in your high school chemistry class and say, where did these elements come from? The teacher wouldn't know from within the domain of chemistry. That was informed by astrophysics. We can trace the elements. They were forged in the centers of stars, high-mass stars, that went unstable at the ends of their lives. They exploded, scattered their enriched contents across the galaxy, sprinkled into gas clouds that then collapsed and formed stars and planets and life. And so these ideas, these cosmic perspectives, this pilgrimage to the cosmos, there are people who say, this makes me feel small, because I need to see the immensity of the cosmos. And I say, no, you're not thinking about it the right way. By the way, when we opened our facility, I got a letter from a psychologist. He had seen our show, which was a zoom out from Earth, and Earth just shrinks to nothingness as you go to the edge of the universe. And he wrote me a letter that says, I specialize in the psychological effects of things that make people feel insignificant. And I thought, bummer of a job. Man, is that what you do for a living? And he said, needless to say, your show was the greatest elicitor of feelings of smallness I have ever seen. Will you allow me to conduct a survey on the people who visit your show? And I thought to myself, there's something wrong here, because why does he feel small, but when I look up in the universe, I feel large? Then I realized the problem was his ego was too large to begin with. He came to the problem thinking too highly of who and what he was to begin with, because then everything that happened in the show destabilized his self-image. Whereas I know that the molecules in my body are traceable to phenomena in the cosmos. It's quite literally true that we are stardust. In the highest exalted way one can use that phrase. There's a kinship with the cosmos that resonates deeply with New Age thinking, but I'm not apologetic about that. It's what we find. If whatever we find resonates with whoever, go ahead, take it. I want somebody to put electrodes on my head. And when I reflect on our kinship with the cosmos, when I do the calculation that shows that a 15-ton meteorite that we have in the center of the Rose Center for Earth and Space, it's an iron meteorite. When I do the calculation that shows that if you take all of the iron from the hemoglobin of the people in the tri-state area of New York City, you can recover that much iron out of their blood, and realize that the iron from that meteorite and the iron from your blood has common origin in the core of a star. Tell me what part of my brain is lighting up, because that excites me. That makes me want to grab people in the street and say, have you heard this? I feel, and I use words. I bask in the majesty of the cosmos. I use words, compose sentences that sound like the sentences I hear out of people who had revelations of Jesus. I want someone to do that experiment, because the day you do, if the same centers in my brain are excited by these cosmic thoughts as what are going on in the mind of a religious person, that's something to know. That's going to be really interesting finding. Because what that tells me as an educator is, let me offer the universe to people. And they'll start taking it in. And they'll start achieving those feelings that they had before. And I don't so much care whether they abandon previous feelings. I've got an offering that keeps growing, that keeps becoming more majestic. When the Hubble telescope was announced that we were going to cancel the Hubble telescope, the greatest outcry to not do that was not the astrophysicists. It wasn't from within NASA. It was the public. It was all over the op-ed pages and the talk shows. The public took ownership of the Hubble Space Telescope because the universe was coming into their bedroom, into their living room, onto their computer. They were a participant on the frontier of discovery. And as far as I can tell, if you let them know that it's not something that we're in the universe, but in fact, given the chemistry of it all and the nuclear physics of it all, not only are we in the universe is in us. And I don't know any deeper spiritual feeling than what that brings upon me. And I just wanted to leave you with those thoughts.
Tell me a creation story more wondrous than that of a living cell forged from the residue of an exploded star. Tell me a story of transformation more magical than that of a fish howling out onto land and becoming amphibian, or that of a mammal, or that of a reptile taking to the air and becoming bird, or that of a mammal slipping back into the sea and becoming a whale. Surely, this science-based culture of all cultures can find meaning and cause for celebration in its very own cosmic creation story. Do you know where I found that quote? 15 years ago. It was on the cover of the national membership magazine of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I was at somebody's house, they gave me a copy of this, and I was so blown out of the water and impressed by that quote, I decided I was going to track down and marry the author. And that's a true story, folks. If you want to explore this kind of a sacred way of thinking about evolution more deeply, and especially if you want to share this perspective with others very, very inexpensively, what we most recommend are our DVDs, because we say freely burn as many copies of our DVDs as you want, or you can take them to Kinko's and have them make copies. We have the covers up on the website, so if you have a color printer, you can just print off exact replicas, basically for a few bucks. Each of these is 4 hours of our best programs. And you know, I'm looking around and I'm realizing this isn't a young audience, so let me say something in case it's not obvious. This does not mean put them in a fire. It means make copies. I actually had a 75-year-old woman come up to me after one of my programs and she said, "Thank you for explaining that, because I didn't understand." Now, we have study guides that you can download from the website. The first 2 hours of this is a program that I delivered in Colorado Springs, Colorado, to a group of Christians on Tuesday night. I gave the exact same program, didn't change a single slide, to a group of atheists on Wednesday night. And both groups loved the program. And I find that encouraging. The second 2 hours of this is I did a 2-hour program for high school girls at a Catholic Girls Academy. And I just opened it up. I just said, ask me any questions. And they asked some really conservative questions. So if you have any conservative Catholics or conservative evangelicals in your life, or if you happen to be a conservative Christian, I highly recommend this. Now, this is mostly Connie. It's got 2 of my most popular sermons, but the other 3 hours and 15 minutes of this is Connie. She does a 45-minute program called Coming Home to North America. It's how to become native to this continent. See, being a Native American isn't just having Native American blood. It's a mindset. It's a heart set. It's like all of us, whether we're native, traditionally Native American or not, can become native to this continent. This is her most popular program of all. We Are Made of Stardust. In fact, here just in a couple minutes, she'll do a little 20-minute parable to let you know how she's teaching this to kids, and also to adults too, but it's a fun parable. But this is what I believe is her greatest legacy. I believe this here, this death through deep time eyes, is I think what she'll be remembered for 200 years from now. Now, this one here, the first 2 hours, is where I get into all the Christian stuff. Sin, salvation, the kingdom of God, heaven and hell, Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. I talk about the naturalizing or the realizing of these core Christian concepts. But the second 2 hours is the main program I delivered in all settings, religious and not religious, for almost 3 years. In fact, many people said that this was my most popular program that I've done in the last 10 years. And I call it Beyond Sustainability, an Inspiring Vision of the Next 250 Years. It's on the second 2 hours of this. And the reason that I picked 250 years is because if you compress the history of the universe into 100 years, like if you make 14 billion years equals 100 years, at that time scale, every minute is 250 years. So think about it. If we've got 100 years of trends to look at, there ought to be a few things we can say about what the next minute might be like. And it's very hopeful. I spent about a half hour on this directionality here. Many people have told me that this is the most hopeful stuff I've offered in the last 10 years. I compare how the mechanistic paradigm, the idea that the universe is like a complex clock. Did you realize, and God's the clockmaker? Did you realize that that worldview didn't exist before we had clocks? No, seriously. It's about 500, 600 years old. Well, that worldview transformed the political, economic, and social Western world during this 40-year period. And I believe that in the next 40 years or so, we're going to see the same kind of major changes. I believe we're already beginning to see a global democratic revolution that will continue. We're going to see an environmental, or what I call biomimicry revolution, where we mimic biology rather than mimicking machines in our redesign of law, medicine, politics, economics. And I believe in the next 40 years, we're going to see a worldwide spiritual revival as all the religions come into their glory, come into their greatness as a result of not just tolerating an ecological evolutionary worldview, but wholeheartedly embracing it. But there may need to be a death before the resurrection of religion. Now again, all we're talking about is the next minute on the cosmic century timeline. These aren't the things that we might have to deal with. We're going to have to deal with these things. And then what are the things that we may or may not have to deal with? But by God, if we've got to deal with any of these things, they're going to be huge. This is nuclear, biological, or chemical, or genetic, nanotechnology, or robotic error or terror. You could put exploding oil platforms in there too. Now, I don't leave people here This is the scary stuff, but I don't leave people here. I want people to have authentic hope. And we're not going to have authentic hope if we're in denial about what we are definitely going to have to deal with or what we might have to deal with. But then I say, okay, what are the long-term and the short-term positive trends that we can bank on? We can trust that these trends are going to continue. In fact, in many cases, these trends have existed longer than humans have ever been around. This is very hopeful stuff. And then finally, what's the likely good news? I'm not talking about crossing our fingers and toes and praying that Jesus, the cosmic janitor, comes and cleans up the mess we've made. I'm saying, what's the likely good news in the next 250 years? And this is very hopeful stuff. And again, I spent about a half hour on all this good news. So that's on the second 2 hours of that. So please, if you do get any of these, please do make copies. One of the things that we're always looking for are writing retreat locations. So if you have a second home or a vacation home, or you go to Australia once a year for a couple months and you'd like us to house sit or would be willing to have us house sit, please let me know. Because we're always looking for retreat places. Also, we do our programs free of charge, but we also have a basket in the back. I'm going to pass out these envelopes. And if you'd like to make a donation, you don't have to, please. But I would greatly appreciate it, and we're trying to raise the money so we can stay put for 6 months and finish a year-long curriculum that Connie wants to do for young people. No. So I'd like to conclude with a song. Songs are full of night language. They're full of poetry. That's why they can touch our hearts. That's why they can inspire us. And what I love about this song is there's a young man who put together, these are some of the most effective science popularizers of the last 30 years, and he has them singing their words. So what Carl Sagan said in the Cosmos theory, here he has singing, and millions, actually tens of millions of young people are being turned on to science because of these music videos. My daughter introduced this one to her college campus. She said within 2 weeks, hundreds of students were playing this out of their dorm room. So I wanted to share it with you, not because this is the kind of music that most of us our age would listen to, but I want to share it because it's a cultural phenomenon, and it's a way of young people being turned on the sacred side of science.
We're all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically.
I think nature's imagination is so much greater than man's. He's never gonna let us relax, 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 relax.
We live in an in-between universe where things change alright, but according to patterns, rules, or as we call them, laws of nature.
I'm this guy standing on a planet. Really, I'm just a speck. I'm just a speck compared with a star. The planet is just another speck. To think about all of this, to think about the vast emptiness of space. There's billions and billions of stars, billions and billions of specks.
The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together. The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
Across the sea of space, the stars are alerts. We've traveled this way before, and there is much to be learned.
We're all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically.
I find it elevating and exhilarating to discover that we live in a universe which permits the evolution of molecular machines as intricate and subtle as we.
I know that the molecules in my body are traceable to phenomenon in the cosmos. That makes me want to grab people in the street and say, have you heard this?
The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together. The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
There's this tremendous mass of waves all over in space, which is the light bouncing around the room, going from one thing to the other. And it's all really there, really there. But you gotta stop and think about it, about the complexity to really get the pleasure. It's all really there, really there. The inconceivable nature. To think about all of this, to think about the vast emptiness of space. There's billions and billions of stars, billions and billions of specks.
The beauty of a living thing is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together. The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
Across the sea of space, the stars are other sun. We've traveled this way before, and there is much to be learned.
Carl Sagan walking into the light. He actually died at the same cancer center that I was treated at. It's very moving. So Connie's going to talk about one of the parables, not talk about, she's going to do one of our great story parables. This is our main website. And so she's going to do one called Startle, the Story of an Average Yellow Star. So if you've got an extra 20 minutes, I encourage you to go with her over to the chapel. And I'd like to close with a quote. Oh, actually, one of the things I want to mention is that these parables are not just stories. It's science told with values, with a sense of meaning and values, as traditional parables and sacred stories were. So it's really quite fascinating. So I'd like to close with a quote from Christopher Fry's play, A Sleep of Prisoners. It goes like this. The human heart can go the lengths of God. Cold and dark we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries cracks, breaks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the flood, the upstart spring. Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to face us everywhere, never to leave us, until we take the longest stride of soul that folk ever took. Affairs are now soul-sized. The enterprise is exploration into God. So what are you waiting for? It takes so many thousand years to wake. But will you wake, for heaven's sake? Thank you.
Explosion, and for the science, I'm going to keep out this picture during the parable because I view this as the best way to introduce kids to the periodic table of elements. I call this the new periodic table of elements. Colors mean something. Right now our sun is hydrogen squeezing into helium in its core. 3 billion years or 4 billion years from now, our sun will run out of hydrogen, use it all up, and start squeezing the helium into carbon when it becomes a red giant. It gets more creative when it becomes a powder. Kind of nice, huh? Now, our star is not large enough to produce anything more than that, but stars that start off 8 to 100 times bigger than our sun, big blue stars that are born, go through their elements pretty quickly. Their gravity is so much stronger. Ultimately, a supernova explosion happens and all of these elements are created. In this story, you'll hear silicon, calcium, iron as well in here, but all of these atoms are created. So that's all you need to know. And I'm going to need 3 volunteers here. I'll be the narrator. Nothing scary or embarrassing in this at all. I'd first like to ask for somebody who likes to move. You might be able to tell I like to move. Somebody who likes to move. You have the least amount to say, but you have to be able to move a couple times. So somebody brave who would like to wear this scarf, you will be called Big Blue. Yes, Big Blue. All right. Excellent. So you can just put that around your neck. The parable happens in 2 parts, so Big Blue, here's Act 1, and here's Act 2. So you can leave Act 2 on there. And anyone who gets a script, all you need to do is to read the first part up to the line to prepare yourself. It tells you about your personality. Now, the 2 main stars that we have here, we have the main character, Startle, which is an average yellow star. We'll wear this scarf. Startle is the actor who's in the entire play, who feels like an average star. Come on up. Yes, come on up. You get to be an average. There you go, perfect. All right, now we have, this parable is also about mentoring. Anyone feel that they're rising into their elderhood, or maybe you've been there for quite a while, and that you have something to impart, and you have some patience with There's no seat for you. You're one. No. You're one of the ones up here.
You're a mentor and don't know it, George.
You're a mentor and don't know it. So here's going to be your scarf for the day. Start with the average yellow star.
There you go. Real wrist colors.
And we're going to put this over here for Act 2. You're going to come over here and switch that scarf into that, and none of you heard that. It's going to be a big surprise. What's this? Oh, right. So all you need to do right now, just read this part while I talk to the group, and then we're ready to start.
Right now?
Yeah, you'll start on stage. Yep. So our 3 actors, all you have to do is finish reading those parts. And we're going to start off with just Startle. Startle, have you finished finding out? Oh yeah, you've got not much of a personality down here. Come on out. Okay. All right, let's have you start over here. Startle's going to be on stage the whole time. I'm the narrator, so I don't get a scarf. I'm just in Earth. Act 1. Act 1 of Startle, the story of an average yellow star. Once upon a time in our very own galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, an average yellow star was born amidst a cluster of big, bright blue sibling stars. Let us call this average yellow star Startle, because any star that is to be the hero of the story deserves to have a proper name.
Hello, my name is Startle, and I don't want to be an average yellow star.
Startle and its sibling stars were all born at the same time. They were jolted into existence by the exploding shock wave from a nearby supernova star that was dying. In this way, one generation of stars gives birth to the next. This, it seems, is the way of the universe.
I am the same age as my sibling stars, but all of them are big, bright, and the most beautiful color of all, blue.
Startle, the average yellow star, looked a lot like our own star, the sun, would have looked at an early age. We Earthlings know that our sun is powerful. We know that the sun is big and that it is bright. But Startle didn't feel powerful. Startle felt small and dim and weak compared to its sibling stars, who were all big, blue, and 1,000 times brighter.
Oh, I want to be big, I want to be bright, and most of all, I want to be blue.
place of birth and from one another. After 20 million years, they were still close enough to carry on a conversation, but not for much longer. So Startle, the average star, called out to one of its big blue siblings. Blue sibling, come on up here and pretend that you're a distance away.
Hey, Big Blue.
Hey, Startle, what's up?
Nothing much. How about you?
Something's very strange happening to me. I'm not sure what it is. I've been squeezing hydrogen and helium all my life.
Me too.
Well, I'm not doing much of that anymore.
What? If you're not making helium anymore, how do you stay so bright?
I seem to be squeezing helium into lots of other stuff, especially oxygen, even some silicon, and calcium.
I wonder whether that will happen to me. After all, you and I are the same age, so I should be changing too.
Just then, a stranger wandered near the pair of sibling stars. A stranger wandered near the pair of sibling stars.
Who are you?
Well, perhaps I might be of assistance.
Oh, okay. Who are you?
I am an elder yellow star. I am 5 billion years old.
Oh no, I am only 20 million years old. Does that mean I'm going to stay average and yellow forever, just like you?
Not quite forever.
You could turn a little bit towards your friend here.
But long enough. Not quite forever, but long enough.
Hey, you, old star. You're upsetting my sieve. Just leave us alone.
Young one, I don't have time to explain, but be prepared for a tumble. I'll see you again after things settle down.
The elder yellow star swung around and headed back into the galaxy. Big Blue.
Oh, Startle, I feel strange. I'm getting sick. Maybe you should keep your distance.
Okay, Big Blue. I hope you feel better soon.
Startle turned and saw Elder Yellow Star retreating into the distance. Having nothing better to do, Startle began to follow. Then all of a sudden, there was again a terrible explosion happening again. Startle lost balance and began to tumble. And then they're pretending that they've tumbled, but here they are back at center stage.
Oh, what happened?
Such a powerful shock wave and enormously bright light can mean only one thing. I am very sorry to report that one of your sibling stars has just gone supernova.
How can you be sorry? That bright light is awesome. I'd love to be able to do that.
Supernova is indeed a noble path for a star. Supernovas generously send back into the galaxy all the complex atoms that they made during their short lives.
What do you mean by short life?
When a star goes supernova, it explodes violently and sends back into the galaxy most of what it has made inside itself. Things like oxygen and silicon and calcium.
Hey, that's what Big Blue was making. Oh, Big Blue was making oxygen and silicon and calcium, but then started to feel sick.
Yes, my young friend, I am sorry to say that your sibling has died. And the others will die too, very soon.
How can that be? My blue siblings are so much bigger than I ever was. They have so much more hydrogen to use. They can't possibly have burned it all.
Oh, yes, they can. Think about it. If your big blue siblings are 1,000 times brighter than you are, then they must be using up their hydrogen fuel 1,000 times faster. That is why they are so bright. And so their lives are very short.
Startle grew quiet and very sad. The elder yellow star tried to offer some comfort.
Such is the way of the universe, my friend. We all die. Even so, we all have the opportunity to create something important before we go and to leave our gifts for the next generations of stars to use.
Of what use is calcium? Of what use is oxygen? And of what use is stupid helium?
Oh dear, it looks like another one of your siblings is about to go. There is no time left to continue our conversation, but I shall see you again, my young friend. In the meantime, I suggest you watch for...
Just then came a shockwave from a second supernova explosion. Startle and the elder yellow star both lost their balance and began tumbling in different directions. And so they're tumbling in different directions. And, oh my gosh, the shock wave continues to travel out into the universe. I see it hit the front row. No, I see and the second row, and the third row, and the back row is just like smashed against the back wall and jumping up and oh. So much is happening. All right, that's the end of Act 1. Let's begin Act 2. Very short. All right, for Act 2, who do we need here? Okay, we're startled. Yeah, okay, startled here. Oh, yeah. Act 2. Our sad young, come a little closer, startled. Our sad young star was now alone. Many years would pass, and thankfully, so would the grief. In fact, billions of years would pass before the two yellow stars would meet again. But this time, Startle would not recognize the elder star.
Hello, my friend. I see that you have made something of yourself indeed.
Oh, you startled me. Who are you?
Of course you do not recognize me because I'm no longer yellow. In my old age, I have turned red. I have become a red giant star.
Oh, it's you. I'm sorry I was rude to you back when I last saw you 5 billion years ago.
You have matured very well, Startle.
Thank you.
I am thrilled to see that. In your 5 billion years as an average yellow star, you have actually created more than I have done in 10 billion years.
What do you mean?
Oh, you must not have heard me when that second supernova shock wave struck us both. I tried to tell you to watch that third planet of yours.
Do you mean this little speck that keeps circling around me?
Indeed, indeed.
It's colder than even the weakest of stars. How could anything exciting possibly happen out there? It can't even make helium.
I suggest you examine that little planet carefully.
It has turned a lovely shade of blue. I still love the color blue, though I no longer wish to be anything other than yellow.
Look closer.
Oh, I see many things moving around on the brown and green stuff. And I see different things swimming in the big blue pools.
Ah, my friend, such is the way of the universe. You produced a steady supply of starshine during all your years of squeezing hydrogen into helium. That starshine permitted life to evolve on that planet of yours. Well done.
I created life. I created life. Oh, let's congratulate Startle for a job well done. The play continues.
Wow. I now see that being average, dim, and yellow is actually better than being big and bright and blue.
Not so fast, my friend. Look at your planet again and then answer this question. What is the atom that makes the bones inside those moving things strong?
Who can help Startle learn which kind of atoms makes bones strong? Just call it out.
Calcium.
Yes, it is calcium that makes strong bones. Now answer this question. What atom is at the very center of the red blood cells in those moving things?
I don't know. Who can help Startle answer this question?
Iron.
Yes. it is iron that is in the blood of those creatures. Now tell me this. Where did those calcium and iron atoms come from?
Who can help Startle learn where calcium and iron atoms come from, where they were formed?
I understand. Calcium and iron are made inside of the big blue stars, so all of us are important. Yes, I now see that big blue stars are very important too, but what about you, old one? Are you doing anything important now that you've turned red?
Look again at your little planet and answer this question. What atom is inside every cell of every living creature?
I don't know.
Right here we got it. Carbon.
Carbon.
Indeed, it is. Carbon is precisely what I am now creating as a red giant star.
That is a wonderful gift. Will I ever make carbon?
Yes, but that won't happen for a very long time. During the next 5 billion years, you will remain an average yellow star. But you will be an average yellow star with a very important responsibility.
I will do my job well. I will keep sending starshine to the life on my little planet.
Very good. Now, my friend, I must go.
Why?
It will soon be the time for me to recycle back into the galaxy the gift of carbon that I have created. And maybe, just maybe, an average yellow star who is yet to be born will be surrounded by planets. Perhaps one of those planets will be put to use the carbon atoms that I create. Perhaps that planet will evolve life.
But will you have to die for that to happen?
Yes. But my way of dying will be much gentler than that of a supernova explosion. Even so, much of what I have created will go back into the galaxy.
Are you afraid to die?
Well, I used to be afraid, but now that I am old, I am very satisfied with the star life I have already lived. As a red giant, what matters to me most is that this whole amazing process continues. I want new stars to continue to be born. I want life to continue to evolve. I am sure you will feel the same way in another 5 billion years.
So, I'm going to die too?
Ah, such is the way of the universe. Everything dies eventually. And that is what makes possible this whole grand circle of life. Without death, there could be no more birth.
The circle of life. I think I understand that part.
My friend, know this. Another 5 billion years will pass before it is your time to recycle the stardust atoms you have created. So carry on as a magnificently average yellow star and continue with your cosmic task of helping one of your planets evolve life.
You can count on me for that.
The red giant star, who was once just an average yellow star, turned away and began to wander gracefully into the abyss. Startle watched its friend grow dimmer and dimmer until there was nothing left to see. Perhaps the star had simply ventured out of sight. Or perhaps the red giant had shed its cloak of hydrogen and helium and carbon and was cooling into a very dim white dwarf. Millions of years would pass. Startle continued to make more helium and was very busy watching how life evolved on its little planet. Startle often remembered with affection the elder yellow star. And Startle remembered, too, its big, bright blue siblings, all of whom had long ago died in glorious supernova explosions. One day, while wandering through the galaxy, Startle saw a very young and very average yellow star out there in the distance. You know what happens next. Startle began to move toward the young star. Hey, hello there, young one. Such is the way of the universe. The end.
I once had a 7th grader who became a much better thespian than I am. His name is Patrick Duffy.
If any of you get excited by this and want to create a parable, go on thegreatstory.org, click on parables. You can see the dozen we've already got. They're all downloadable for free. You just need scarves for props. You can do them wherever you want. But think about writing some or encouraging a group of people to work together and write some. There's instructions on how to go about doing it. So if you get some, you just email me and I can get it up there, and that can be part of your great work out in the galaxy. Thank you.